Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update from Sebastian Fitness Solutions.
Have you ever been told that if you want to build the outer head of your quadriceps, that is your quad sweep, you got to do squats with a narrow stance? Or if you want to build the inner head, that is your teardrop muscle, you got to squat with a wider stance? Is that true, or is it just plain hogwash? Watch as I break it down using science. Coming right up. What is up, everybody? This is Sebastian from Sebastian Fitness Solutions, coming to you from the wonderful facility at YFC IC Colony in Borivali. Now, diving straight into that question, is it possible to target your inner or outer quads? Can it be done? Is it possible to target specific heads of your quadricep muscle using variations in an exercise, whether it's your stance width or the direction in which your toes point? Can it be done, or is it a myth? It's absolutely a complete myth. And anyone who tells you otherwise doesn't have a basic clue of muscular anatomy and kinesiology. Now, I'm pretty sure that you've been sold this myth by somebody at your gym, some bro at your gym, or your favorite bodybuilder, or even your favorite YouTuber, which is frankly very disappointing because people look up to these guys to give them accurate information, and if only they did the most basic amount of research, they wouldn't be spewing out this garbage, and yet they are, so alas. But anyway, in this video, I'm going to break this myth down for you using anatomical facts. So diving straight into it, let's first examine the claims. Like when most people talk about targeting specific heads of the quadricep muscle, they talk about doing so using two ways. Number one, by changing stance width. Particularly, what they claim is that narrow stance or narrow width would supposedly target your outer quads, and a wide stance width would target your inner quads. And number two is in variations of the direction in which your toes are pointing. So they claim that if your toes point outwards, then it will train your inner quads, whereas if your toes point inwards or straight, then they would target your outer quads. Now, to understand why both of these claims are bogus, you need to first understand the muscle or the anatomy of the quadricep muscle itself. Now, I've gone into the muscle anatomy of quadriceps in great detail in my muscle masterclass series on the quads. So if you have watched that video, you should probably know what I'm getting into, and you should in fact probably know the answer already. Heck, here's a little challenge for you guys. For those of you who've watched that video, pause this video, go down below into the comment section and comment down below as to why you think these changes, that is a change in your stance width or a change in your toe pointing direction, would have no impact on the quadricep muscle based on what you've learned in the muscle masterclass. If you watch that video, this is a perfect way for you to test your knowledge. Go ahead, comment down below, and then continue watching this video. And then towards the end, you can go and see whether the answers that you gave were accurate or not. Go ahead, do it. Seriously, I mean it, guys. Go ahead and do it right now. Okay? So anyway, getting back to it. So looking at the anatomy of the quadriceps muscles, we've got four heads, as the name suggests, for the quadriceps muscle, that is vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, and rectus femoris. Now, leaving aside the other two muscles, what we want to focus on right now is the vastus lateralis and the vastus medialis, which is the outer head and the inner head of the quadricep muscle, respectively. These muscles originate at either sides of the top of the femur bone, that is the bone of your upper leg, and they come together at the bottom and collectively connect and insert at the patella through the patellar tendon, right? Now, keeping this in mind, let's evaluate both those claims. The first claim, that is changing your stance width. So the claim here is that if you widen your stance, then you should be targeting your inner head, right, your vastus medialis, and if you narrow your stance, you should be targeting your outer head. Look at me on the screen right now as I increase my stance or I reduce my stance. Where am I moving to create this movement? At what joint am I moving to create this wide and narrow position? It is at the hip joint, right? It's at the hip joint. To make my stance wider, I do what's called as hip abduction, right? I abduct at the hip, that is going away from the midline of the body. And to come or bring my stance narrower, I do what's called as hip adduction, that is bringing yourself closer to the midline of the body. Right? So the movement occurs purely at the hip joint. Now, given this fact and the fact that both of these muscles that we're considering originate from the femur bone, and this movement happens at the hip joint, How on earth would changing your stance width have any impact on the quadriceps muscles, particularly these two? It won't. Because your movement is taking place at the hip joint where neither of these muscles have any connection with the hip joint. Both of these muscles originate at the femur bone, which is the bone below the hip joint. They have no connection with the hip joint. So how on earth would the influence of this hip joint change make any difference to the quadricep muscle? It won't. It should be as clear and obvious as day to anybody who understands basic muscular anatomy. Changing your stance width, making it wide or narrow, has no bearing on the quadriceps muscle because those quadricep muscles are not involved in this in to out movement at all. So this should make it very evident to you how absolutely senseless this claim is that widening or narrowing your stance would have any impact on these muscles, because they absolutely won't, because they absolutely have no connection. Right? Now looking at claim number 2, that is changing the direction in which your toes are pointing. Once again, observe me on the screen. When I take my toes out, how am I doing this? At what joint am I moving? Again, I'm moving at the hip joint. I'm not moving anywhere else but the hip joint. I'm doing what's called as hip external rotation. I'm rotating my leg outward, which is why my toes are pointing outward. It's my hip joint that's rotating outward. And that's how I'm achieving this outer toe position. Similarly, again, watch on the screen, where as I bring my toes in, I am doing what's called as hip internal rotation. Again, moving at the hip, right? So once again over here, how on earth would this impact your quadriceps, which is your vastus medius and your vastus lateralis? How is it going to be affected when there's no connection to the hip? It's again movement at the hip joint. Yes, there is a very slight movement that takes place of external internal rotation at the knee joint, but when you're standing straight, it doesn't really happen. You need to flex your knees to 90 degrees and then you can probably manipulate your knee rotation, but in a straight position, it doesn't happen that way. It happens by moving your hip joint, not your knee joint. Your hip is what moves, as you evidently saw in the footage I just showed you. So, given all this, keeping all these things in mind, it should be as clear as day, as obvious as it can possibly get to anybody, even if you're watching, how any of these changes that people claim would impact your quadriceps will not. They certainly will not, because they have no connection to each other. Now, I know what you must be wondering. You must be thinking, but Suneet, I've tried both of them. I've tried doing wide stance squats and I feel it in my inner thighs. You know, similarly, when I squat with a narrow stance, I only feel it in the outer thighs. So doesn't that mean something's happening? Well, something is happening, but it's not what you think. You see, when you squat with a wider stance, what you do is you end up abducting your hip wide. And what that does is it causes a stretch in your adductor muscles, your inner thigh muscles, which are not your quadriceps. They are adductor muscles, which again are placed in a stretch because you're abducting. And as a result, you're feeling something over there. You see, when a muscle is overtly stretched and then you put load on it, it is naturally going to experience some amount of pain. But that doesn't mean that that is necessary. That's not your quads, that's your adductor muscles. And yes, it does end up working your adductor muscles because it puts your adductor muscles through a greater range of motion. But again, that's not your quadricep muscle, that's not your inner thigh. Anatomy. This is your vastus medialis, this teardrop muscle. Your adductors are up here. They're not connected, they're not the same. That is what's working, and what you feel in a wide stance squat, not this, that. Please understand the difference. Similarly, when you do a narrow stance squat, the reason why you don't feel anything anywhere inside and you feel it on the outside is because now your adductors, the range of motion you've created for adduction, because it's not stretching out, so the range of motion when you stand up is barely there for adduction, it's almost negligible. And in that case, the adductor muscles aren't really working so much. So you don't feel it on the inside, you probably feel it only on your quads. And that's the reason you feel it's on the outside. Well, again, that's just your quads working as they normally would. And you don't feel it because your inner thigh muscles, your adductors, aren't being stretched like in the other case. So whatever you're feeling is happening, but it's something entirely different than what you think it is. So long story short, whatever you're feeling, yes, you're feeling it, but it has nothing to do with quadriceps activation, period. Same thing with your toes pointing in and out. Again, toes pointing out equals greater amount of hip external rotation, which to a certain extent causes hip abduction too, which as a result will stretch your adductors and therefore make you feel it on the adductors. Similarly, toes pointing in, knees caved in, no hip abduction, less hip adduction range of motion, therefore you don't feel it on the inside. It's as simple as that. It's as clear as that. It has nothing to do with your quadriceps, people. Please understand this. I really hope that this has explained it to you, because it can't possibly make it more clear and more easy and obvious than this. So ultimately, I really hope that this video has opened your eyes about this particular myth, this very prevalent myth that's been floating around. And I really hope that you will never again fall for it. But more importantly, one closing thought I want to leave you with is this. If there is somebody out there, some YouTuber, some bodybuilder, whoever you're following, and he or she has told you to do this wide, narrow stance to target your inner outer quads, please do yourself a favor and stop following them. Because anybody with even the most basic understanding of muscle anatomy and kinesiology would know this is a myth. So for that person to be out there and give you this crappy advice and crappy bullshit information, it just shows how little they know and how unqualified they are to give you advice. So do yourself a favor and unfollow them. That's it, guys. I really hope that this video has been informative and eye-opening for you. And if it has been, don't forget to give this a thumbs up. It really helps the channel a lot. If you haven't subscribed already, click that subscribe button below for more informative videos in the future. I promise that I'll be busting more myths out there in the future. I'm here for that. I'm going to bust each and every single myth using scientific facts and evidence. So be sure to subscribe to stay updated to new videos. And lastly, don't forget to share this video with your friends and fellow gym mates and anybody else you think could benefit from this, so we can finally put this myth to rest. It's been around for a long time and it's going to take a lot of effort. But with your help, if you share, if you tag your friends, if you get this out there to as many people as possible, we can help put it to rest together. So I really hope that you will do all that, and that's all I have for you today. But until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Hey, thank you for watching that video. Don't forget to hit that like button and to subscribe. Also, head over to the description box below for a link to download my free ebook, The 9 Habits to Successfully Build Muscle. Go ahead and grab it. And lastly, to watch another video, click right over here.